is a perfect segue into the next conversation, which is around how exactly is the government of Kenya encouraging green investment? And this is a conversation between Peter Odhengo and Mark Napier. I will pass it on to them to set the stage on this aspect of the dialogue.
Thank you, James, very much indeed. And welcome, Peter, to the conversation on climate finance in Kenya. It's great to have you with me today. Looking forward to this discussion. Peter, I'm going to jump straight in, but I really welcome some insight from you as to how Kenya was so quick relative to other countries to recognize the need for green policy and regulatory reform, because it has become a leader. How did it get going? So what was the spur that got it going so quickly?
Thank you very much, Mark. Kenya started the journey long before, but the reason why we took the trajectory that we are here today is just what we hear. Kenya realized that we are very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. More than 70% of the country is arid and semi-arid areas. Millions of Kenyan local people are suffering, and as such, we wanted to see how we can respond to this.
Just not hearing you very clearly, Peter, but let's just see what we can do.
Just a second. Can I use this? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's good. That's very good.
Oh, great. So let me just rewind a little bit. That one, as Kenyans, we knew that on the onset that we are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. 70% of the county is sessile and semi-arid and semi-arid areas. We have coastlands, we have rivers and lakes, which are threatened by the impact of climate change. But over and above, we were also very lucky to host the IGAD Climate Center here in Nairobi. So Kenya had access to data, critical information. It is upon this background that we used this critical information within the region as an evidence basis to put Kenya on the trajectory and started long ago in realizing this. So in addition, also the economy, our economy is also nature-based. And as the PS said, those nature-based are the ones which are heavily impacted by the impact of climate change. The local people have all along been very sensitive to issues of environment, given that UNEP was established here in the early 70s. That presence also made the local people to be very, very sensitive to matters of environment and conservation. As have been said, Professor Wangari Maathai, even the late president with his soil conservation, all those created the path. But the turning point was more or less in 2008 when we now said, let's put this one into economic perspective. And the first study on the economics of climate change, which indicated that Kenya will be losing between 2 to 2% of the GDP over the 10 years, really sparked really crossed a lot of ripple within the system. It is upon that background that the government said, now we have to integrate these ones into the policy framework. And those policy framework, that is where we had taken the National Climate Change Response Strategy. That one was followed by the National Climate Change Action Plan 2013. Then that is also was followed by the Climate Change Act 2016. Also GESIP, Green Economy and Implementation Plan 2015 to 2030. The National Adaptation Mitigation Action, NAMA, the National Adaptation Plan. Moving up to now, finally in 2018, where we had the first ever climate finance policy, which was Kenya leading, and I can remember in Mexico how to tell Mexico to follow us, and Bangladesh. And then from that finance policy now, we are moving towards the trajectory, knowing that government alone will not be able to finance the climate change agenda, and that over 80% comes from the private sector, which today make us dig deeper into the green fiscal policy, which has just been talked.
Peter, thank you. You've done a great job at explaining what that incredible sequence of policy and regulatory reform has been. And anybody who's studied that will look on that with some admiration. So here we are. We have been proud to support you on the development of the green fiscal policy framework. So I know that many people on this call would be interested to know what's in it and what we can expect to see from it in the coming months. Can you give us some insights into that?
Great, Mark. One, we have been, as I said, that Kenyan policy is evidence-based. We have been analyzing the flow of climate finance over time. And as you can remember that we are soon launching our climate finance landscape, it has been established that more than 80% of these resources come from the private sector. The government public resources can only leverage up to about 20%, but the aim is to leverage the private sector because climate change is no longer a weather pattern prediction. It is now developmental and it is now investment. So the green fiscal policy, we have also analyzed the behavior and the attitude of the private sector. The private sector is the one which has the responsibility to produce products and services, but they need enabling environment. They need the incentives. They need an environment where they can invest, which is predictable, long-term, and also assuring them that when they put the resources in investment, then they will be able. So this policy is going to have a predictability that if there is an incentive that is promised through the system, there is the sunset is known, the review mechanism is established and is known, and also the close of that incentives will be given. But it has to be long-term as opposed to now lackluster, where it can be there today, tomorrow it will be removed, and then you find the private sector or the investors are being stranded with the dead assets because of the policy set. So one of the key outcome of this is predictability, long-term, the ability to leverage alternative sustainable financing, and also to ensure that those products reach those people who are intended. If you remove a subsidy as a result of the introduction of a green fiscal policy as has been done, or if you introduce a carbon tax, then those carbon tax has to be reinvested in the key critical sectors that respond to climate resilience and also building the livelihood of the people who are affected at the local level. So this shift of taking back to where you have removed is what will be given within this policy and the legislative framework in the shortest time possible, and also to keep our leadership and the legislative framework in the landscape.
Peter, are you able to point to any specifics that in the policy framework, or will that have to wait to subsequent announcements? And what's the timetable for the release of this policy document and the legislative process?
Well, it is always policy-making process is a very complex process which includes a number of stakeholders. We, as the technical team in the National Treasury, can only do the technical part, but the legislative framework is embedded within the Parliament. Parliament calendar is very difficult to define and also to decide. In view of that, we may have some policy directives, for example, the promotion of the green transition, or green investment, or green services, which we're already doing anyway. Those ones can be easily afflicted and we incorporate them in the financial bill coming in. But the key elements of this policy, because the private sector, according to their presentation, they want a very standalone legislative framework, which will enable them to move to the midterm, that is 2030, and also the long-term strategy that we are doing in 2050 in compliance with our Paris Agreement under the upgraded NDC, that we have to reduce our emission by 32% by 2030 and also become almost net zero country by 2050. So there are good policy directives that will be coming, but the real policy in itself is a parliamentary debate. But as my PS has promised, we will do all possible to make sure that it comes in as quickly as possible, because we need to raise mobilize resources to finance our upgraded NDC. And we also need to see what we can share with our colleagues as a leader in the continent during the Glasgow meeting. So we will fast track it.
And Peter, may I also sort of go back to what the PS was saying about how some people are quite resistant to change. And when you look at the detail of what's in the draft policy framework, there is a lot of stuff that needs to change. And are you worried about that? Are you worried about confronting that resistance?
Great. To a lesser degree, yes, you have to be worried because COVID-19 has changed a lot of the trajectory. But nevertheless, we have put in effective mechanisms which are moving from the backside to the front. And that is, you are also aware that we are working on financing locally led climate action, which is a very key locally led process. And it is the people who can resist. But if the people are with us at the local level, then definitely that resistance will be able to be overcome. To surmount that, it is not a resistance because the outcome of the policy is only going to build resilience, enhance the environment for doing business, also to enable policymakers crowd in additional resources from sources which have not been hitherto forthcoming. So if you look at the positives of the outcome of the policy, long it outweighs the negatives. And we have been comparing with the support from FSD Africa, UK government. We have been comparing how those policies have been working globally. So we are going to have the best policy with comparative analysis and also with more positive than negative, which will enable the people to support as opposed to resist, because we have the data, we have the information.
Great, Peter. I have two more questions for you. One from the audience. Has Kenya yet set a national net zero target, or does it intend to do that?
Great. As we are talking now, we are working in a twin aeroplane engine. We are currently working on long-term strategy, and that long-term strategy is being developed in parallel with green fiscal policy. And when you see our national climate change landscape study, which has shown us what the public resources we have been putting and mobilizing. So we are soon going to, as soon as our models for the long-term strategy policy, we will be able to set a target which is based on the national circumstance, which is responding to the Kenyan policy and also legislative framework from the MTP to the Vision 2030, the Big Four Agenda, National Climate Change Action Plan, the National Climate Finance Policy, and now the Green Fiscal Policy. So we are soon going to have that when the data is readily available. Okay,
well, I won't push you on an exact date. So my final question goes back to what Nigel was saying, which was really around COP27. So my question is really, will COP27 be hosted in Kenya?
Great. If you go back to the trajectory of history, yes, Kenya did it almost over 10 years ago. It was very successful, the first in the sub-Saharan Africa. The next COP is our allocation because the other one was in Northern Africa. And informal discussions to go that we are better in the region. We are pilots. We have demonstrated the capability. We are ahead. Why they're not trying now? Yes, we can, but let's discuss. There are challenges ahead, but Kenya is not out of the list so far.
Very good. Peter, I would just like to say thank you very much for the conversation. I really appreciate it. We would love to talk to you for longer, but we just don't have time today. But so thank you very much for keeping your answers short. And I appreciate the partnership as well with that we have with the National Treasury. So thank you for that. And with that, so I'm going to hand back to James.